Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Tonight we're going to take a look back at some of the best moments of BronxTalk over the last 4 months. We've moderated political debates, covered the state budget, the environment, COVID, guns, and this one, on May 30th, we did a show on redistricting. And in this segment, Ben Weinberg, Director of Public Policy at Citizens Union, broke down what makes redistricting in New York State distinctive. Take a look.
In a state like New York, redistricting is not only about how it impacts the composition of the House and the control of Congress, as important as it is, and obviously that gets all the attention with the media or the public. But many times, and in fact, most times in a state like New York, redistricting is about what wing of the party or what candidates gets the nomination of the party. In other words, in most districts, whether it's Congress, state Senate, or Assembly, it's a question of who will win the primary, who has a shot at winning the primary. So I will say that even if you're a diehard blue Democrat or if you're a left progressive Democrat, you should want to get, even if you want to get back at Republicans, you should seek to have checks and balances and some fairness in the redistricting process. Otherwise, it is manipulated by the people in power to hurt not only the minority party, but also just anyone outside the power center within the majority party.
I think a lot of people could appreciate what you're saying because really what you're talking about is a foundation of real democracy, and with the dialogue in this country, across the country, in New York and everywhere else, we seem to be getting further away from that. Citizen Union put out a release saying that 2 primaries should be condensed to 1 in August, and I believe it was the League of Women Voters that said, you know what, the heck with all of that, let's do it the way we used to do it and put them all in September. How will the fact that, that's a nice idea, it's not going to happen now. How will the fact that we have the 2 primaries affect voters and affect voter turnout?
Yeah, so that's one of the most unfortunate outcomes of this redistricting chaos. We currently have a June primary for statewide positions, assembly positions, judicial positions, and party positions. And then we have a separate August primary only for the congressional districts and the state Senate districts. Now that we know for decades now, we know that recurrent elections reduce turnout. Voters are kind of oversaturated at that point by campaigns, by ads, by political discussions. They sometimes feel like they've done their civic duty in the first election. So we have ample data going back decades on the fact that multiple elections are not in our best interest, not to mention the fact that they increase costs. Those costs will be will have to be absorbed by local counties, and they burden election officials, campaigns, obviously voters. In New York, we've had 2 primaries in June and in September for a number of years, and we consolidated them. And then we had runoffs in New York City in primaries, and we canceled them as well through the implementation of ranked choice voting. And that was because we realized that 2 primaries or 2 elections, one after another, is bad for turnout, is bad for democracy. The moment the Court of Appeals issued its decision and disappointedly allowed this bifurcated primary season, that moment the legislature should have postponed all primaries to August. It's just disappointing that they have not done that very basic and simple solution, and I leave it to others to guess why they haven't done that.
I want to put up a quote. Obviously, there have been commentaries coming from everywhere. I thought this was particularly poignant and something that Bronx voters could relate to from Representative Jamal Bowman. He said that the purpose of redistricting is to produce districts that better represent the true will of the people and keep communities of interest together. These new maps, unfortunately, do the opposite. These newly approved maps split low-income Black and brown communities in the Bronx, namely the Northeast Bronx, into 3 separate districts. The maps will further mute the voices of these historically underrepresented communities in New York 16, which is his district, of course, and across New York State, dilute the power of Black voters and weaken our representative democracy. And that was Congressman Bowman. So let's turn to David Cruz. And let's start there. We can talk about Congressman Bowman. He's one of the elected representatives who's going to have to look at a whole newly formed district. He really viewed it as kind of large, or whatever it was, 25%, 30% of the Bronx, and then some of Westchester, now a much less percentage of the Bronx and all of Westchester. What do you make of, let's say, what's facing Congressman Bowman right now? David Cruz.
Well, I get the sense that Bowman now obviously doesn't have that much of a major chunk of the Bronx. He was the first Black elected official representing a district that had largely that was held by Eliot Engel for many years, and he had won on sort of like being this very progressive champion and also being a Black politician reflective of the larger community that he had represented. And I think obviously there's a belief that the person who's elected should be like reflective of the dominant demographics. Yeah. And it's true. It looks like Bowman loses Co-op City, which was a major voting base for him in that area. Now it's gone to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and it looks like actually she's gotten almost. I'm looking at the map right now.
We could put let's put the Bronx map up. Here's the Bronx map, so you can see it clearly.
Yeah, it looks like she definitely gained a lot more, and obviously her gain was Jamal Bowman's loss.
On the program we aired the week of July 4th, Estelle Raboni, Director of Sexual and Reproductive Health for the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, responded to the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, explaining the city is making sure that Bronxites get proper sex education so that they can make the right decisions for themselves.
Thank you for your question, Gary. We work really upstream. So not to say that, abortion services are not critically important. Abortion is basic health care, and we support women's access to that really critical health care. But we also work with schools across the city to make sure that young people are receiving comprehensive and medically accurate sex education so that young people know, how do you get pregnant? When does pregnancy really begin? Which is not at fertilization, it's at implantation. What is sexual anatomy? What's a healthy relationship? And then connecting all of those young people through middle school and high school, and especially our most vulnerable young people who are in special education schools or District 75 schools, to the services of high quality teen-friendly clinics so that they can continue to get access to sexual and reproductive health care and also be able to ask questions of those medical professionals. So we do work to make sure that young people have all the information and all of the services that they need so that they don't find themselves in a situation where they might need an abortion. The good news that I would say is that we do live in New York State and we do have minors' rights for young people. But, we have to be careful. As Ms. Hoffman said, we have to be proactive because, the impact that the Supreme Court has made could impact our own laws that protect our young people.
You know, I was thinking about this, and maybe it's I don't know, somewhat naive of me to think. I said, does this decision open up a useful dialogue for you to be able to say, because I'm sure especially young people are coming in going, wait a minute, what is this? What is this about? So rather than you or others, of course, I mean you and your colleagues, have to kind of bring up a subject and talk about it, maybe you can kind of say, well, this is what the law is, and now all of a sudden they kind of get informed. And what is that message to girls, young girls specifically, or even young adults, or anybody, really, any women, that you try to deliver so that they don't have unwanted pregnancies or be in a situation where they've got to make what is a very horrible and difficult decision?
And Gary, is that question to me or Ms. Hoffman?
That's for you, Estelle. I really wanted to get your ideas about, does it open up a dialogue that is useful to you and your colleagues to talk to young people and say, well, now wait a minute, let's look at what's going on here.
I mean, it does, Gary, but quite frankly, it opens up a dialogue that starts off from a position of fear. And we don't want young people to be afraid. They are entitled to these rights. They are entitled to these services. So frankly, we'd like to start from a position of like, here's information that is, good for you to have, that allows you to make healthy and informed choices, as opposed to this right has been repealed from most of the millions of women across the country. And, this is what you need to know about it. I think it's important for young people to know, but also know what they are entitled to, which I think is a much more positive, frame of reference and a frame to go forward.
One of the things, well, I just wanted to add one of the things that has come out in this dialogue, and we'll let Ms. Raboni and then Ms. Hoffman weigh in on it, is the notion, and I was not aware of it till we did a show on this in February, this notion of quote unquote fake clinics that have been set up. We had an advocate on the show in February who said there are more fake clinics than actual abortion clinics in New York City, and maybe in the Bronx. I don't remember the characterization of it. That blew my mind. So, and then this has come out in the media that as part of this effort, there have been people counseling, specifically young girls, but women, all women, to not have an abortion, even if it might not be in their best interest. I mean, so Ms. Raboni, your thoughts about it, and then Ms. Hoffman about it. You're aware of this, I assume.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, we have information on our website that talks very specifically about crisis pregnancy centers, but I'm glad that you call them fake clinics because that's exactly what they are. They mislead women and girls into thinking that they are an actual clinic, but in actuality, what they are there for is to convince young people and women to not move forward with an abortion. And they're very strategically positioned to actual abortion clinics and health centers that provide abortion care right on 149th Street in the South Bronx, across from Planned Parenthood. There is a crisis pregnancy center, and it's been there for years, and very intentionally to mislead young people and young women of color in particular, and it's a travesty.
That was actually documented, I think, very specifically. I think I saw it in the Times. On July 18th, we had a stirring show about race relations and racial justice. And wouldn't you know it, it was Justin Hurdle-Price, Strategic Communication Specialist for HUR Communications, the youngest member of our top flight panel, who perfectly summed up what young people think about racial justice and why he's supporting a race summit.
I think that's exactly why I'm here, to speak to the young person's perspective, so I'm happy that you had brought out the split, because it is split. There are the young people that feel like they just know what they're doing. They know what they know what they're attacking. They're ready to attack racism because a group is nearby and whatever, right? And then there's also the everyday people who, I played video games with, last night, who are clearly just misinformed and clearly have not been exposed to much other different stories and different experiences while we live on such soil that is, all ours or supposed to.
Without realizing it, you characterized it perfectly. And that is, you can still do what you like to do. You can still play video games using yourself as an example, but you can still have a social context of how to view the world, an understanding of history, understanding of your own history, understanding of American history. I'll give you a chance to talk about this summit that we had just talked about. Why do you think this is a good place to have this conversation and have it in this way? And sell it is what I'm telling you.
Yeah. So I want to say that I came across On the Matter of Race just by going to my kitchen, going to get a snack, just hanging out, being a kid. And I heard a great conversation going on, and I was very intrigued as to what it was. So my mom had told me, I'm teaching a course for white people, 6-month journey. We're talking about systemic racism. And I'm not going to lie, did not believe that was happening.
Like what? Yeah.
I was like, there's no way the white people are signing up to learn about this stuff. There's no way white people are signing up for 6 months to talk about this stuff. I'm like, are you just yelling at them at this point? Like, what are you trying to get done here? But being someone who has taken the journey themselves, there is just so much healing that needs to be done for everyone.
That is so powerful.
White people included. I can't imagine what it's like to look back in your family history and to know that your family owned slaves, or on our end, being people of color, to know that your ancestors were victim to such atrocities, right? So both their own parallels, but they both have their own stories, and they both have their own truths, and they both have their own experiences and dialogues. Yep. And this is literally, we're just offering a place for people to hear everyone else's
and share. I think it would be not only here, right, but you want to share. We have a really wonderful panel, but leave it to the young people to summarize it perfectly. I want to go back around the room, and Michael Partis, let's talk about your work and some of the things that you have done, because you talked about wealth building. You have worked in that direction, and we'll just go around and talk about. I'd like to really. We've got about 8 minutes left. I want to really talk about solutions and what can each person do. I mean, aside from joining the summit and having the right dialogue, but what are you working on, Mike?
A few things. One is a people's plan. So a people's economy would think about wealth building, and it would think about people of African descent being at the center of that. So what is a long-term economic development plan that's designed by African diasporic people who live in the Bronx, pray in the Bronx, love the Bronx? What does it look like for those folks to co-design and develop their long-term economic development plan? So we're part of a coalition called the Bronx Wide Coalition that's working on a 30-year People's Economic Development Plan. And I think over the next several months, we'll be able to share it on.
I want to ask you to give me one item that has crossed the desk that you say this is the kind of thing we want to work on. I want to give people a real idea of what it's going to take. Give me one item.
Manufacturing. I think manufacturing, where people who work with their hands, people who can use self-taught or self-directed learning to be able to get a living wage job or start a business that actually is a part of the supply chain that we're hearing so much about being in disrepair. Manufacturing, working with your hands, self-taught, self-directed, in a business that you start or with a job that right now has a living wage. How do we ensure that manufacturing is a part of the workforce development, the education, and the business development of the Bronx? And the proposal to do that is important.
And when you look at the opportunities for that sort of thing in the Bronx, in terms of the industrial areas that we have, industrial facilities, There's no reason not to. And also, if you walk around our neighborhoods and you go to the local farmers markets, in every neighborhood, we have more and more people saying, "Oh, I make these crafts in my home," or now I've opened like a little food business and I'm doing a restaurant. And it's kind of like a little mini takeout thing. There's more and more and more of that all over the Bronx.
And I just want to say there's an excellent partnership. We have the digital equity, that the foundation is doing, the digital equity piece. It needs hardware. Digital equity needs hardware. There's a partnership there. So it's happening.
In our final best of segment, we're going to go back to July 25th and a show we did with Borough President Vanessa Gibson, who talked in detail about what it would take for her to support homeless facilities in the Bronx. What do you want to see from DHS that would work, that would make you say, this is a good location, this is a good facility, I accept this in the Bronx, because obviously we've got to address the problem.
Right. So let me first say that homelessness is a New York City problem and not a Bronx problem. Every community across the city of New York must do their fair share. They must house their own homeless families and single adults that originate from their particular community, but that doesn't always happen. Historically, over many years, there have been certain communities in the Bronx that have historically been saturated, inundated with not just shelters for single adults, for families, safe havens, juvenile facilities, drug treatment programs, an assortment of different programs for people in need. And we don't turn our backs on anyone that is in need, because we know many of these clients have never had a first chance, let alone a second, third, or fourth chance. They are living with addictions and mental health issues, and they need help and they need supportive services. This new administration, under the leadership of Mayor Adams, the Commissioner Gary Jenkins of DHS, has really tried a different approach. So they're looking at neighborhoods that have historically not necessarily had any of these shelters. I think this is about a balance. It's about looking at the neighborhood, the services that will be provided, who the provider is, right? Let's be honest. Some of these providers are shady.
That is certainly one of the issues.
We need to make sure they're credible
Right.
and they have a good track record of serving the population, because these are contracts and thousands of dollars that they're being awarded to provide services.
So just to understand, you on one hand, you say they should have facilities in the communities that people come from. Originate from. On the other hand, that probably leads to some community saturation. Do you think every neighborhood in the Bronx should kind of pony up and say, look, we understand there's a problem for all of us and we should find space in our community?
I think every neighborhood should at least begin to have those conversations. As I've traveled around the borough, some of the language that I've heard has been unacceptable when people talk about those people thinking that everyone that's homeless is a criminal. Affordable housing equals more crime, and that is far from the case. The majority of homeless families today are employed with a full-time job. They are working class people. They cannot afford the high rents in the Bronx and the city of New York. And guess what? If they could get into a brand new apartment, they would.
I think that would raise the minimum wage question, and I don't think I'm going to bother asking it because, in essence, you've answered it just now. This is so interesting to me, and we talked about the Jerome rezoning for years, and we did a number of interviews about it. And then a year ago, you said, after the Jerome rezoning, I don't think I want to do another rezoning. Yet Mayor Adams said he supports rezoning. He said, we're going to be the rezoning city in America. And then, of course, there's the very large controversy in the East Bronx in the Bruckner rezoning. So what do you think? You like what Mayor Adams said? I know you would support good development, but you don't want to support kind of the difficulties you ran into when you were a council member.
Well, generally, I think we should not call it rezoning. I would like to call it a neighborhood plan, because anytime you are proposing density, changing the zoning, adding new families and people into a community, you need to look at the neighborhood infrastructure, the housing itself, the schools, the parks, the playgrounds, the neighborhood businesses. You need to look at the burden that that particular project may place on a community, particularly those communities that are lower density, those that may have higher density, those that are oversaturated. And so that's why a lot of these projects are often met with a lot of resistance, because people will say the traffic is a nightmare. You can't get to and from schools now. School dismissal time, you can't get through a certain area. We don't have the ability to deal with the infrastructure. And those are legitimate concerns that the city needs to address. What I argued for is an interagency task force of DOT, HPD, DEP, DOE, SCA, a number of organizations that oversee different parts of our city, and getting us all together to talk. So if we're proposing several hundred units for a neighborhood, what is the impact on that local school district, on the parks, on the playgrounds? So these are conversations we should have, honestly, before a proposal happens and not during.
And I know, because we talked about it when it happened, that Councilmember Salamanca insisted that there be proper studies to assess
racial
who's
impact
going to
study.
be racial impact studies and who's going to be displaced. What do you think about that Bruckner rezoning that's created such a controversy? I'm going to guess, because you've already said it, some of the dialogue is not very pleasant. And
No, it wasn't.
that's one issue, but that's an aside.
Yeah.
Would you support that proposal as it exists now?
So I already made my recommendations, because as a part of the ULURP, the Borough President has 30 days. I held 2 hearings, one in person, one remote, and we made our recommendations a few weeks ago. What we did was we are recommending yes with conditions. We want to condense the project. We don't believe an 8-story building in a community of Throgs Neck and Schuylerville that has predominantly been low density of an R4 zoning really would attract and make that beneficial. So what we argued is a lower FAR from 3.3 to 2.2. We reduced the size from 85 feet to 55 feet, 8 stories to 5 stories that would be parallel to the existing school, PS14, that's in the community, because we don't want to we don't want to disrupt the community. We don't want to change the character of the neighborhood. We recognize that 1 and 2 and 3 family home ownership is the way to go, and we encourage that. We made a lot of recommendations. I encourage you to view it, because we talked about home ownership. We talked about the interagency task force dealing with coastal resiliency issues, flooding, and so many things that happen to homeowners there. But we also know that it's housing for seniors, older adults, veterans, a youth recreation center, a new supermarket that has 85 jobs.
Check marks. All those you support.
Check.
And that's it for tonight's program. We will see you back here next week for more Bronx Talk. Definitely want to thank our producers, Rebecca Hemick and Stephen Powell. The director is Benaya War. Here in the studio with me is Joe Boonchan and a cast of thousands. And of course, also thanks to all the guests who make the Bronx a very special place. So we'll see you next week. Good night.